half of our audience is now in the panel. And that's the way it should be. We have so much expertise here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and especially in this area. I am going to introduce our moderator. Well, I have a friend of mine, Sobia Sheikh, is the co-chair of the Anti-Racism Coalition. I said to her, I was talking to her, I said, who would you recommend to moderate this discussion? Who would you recommend? And she said, Raven. And so Raven is and I'm so glad that Raven's able to make it. So Raven is a Trinidad and Tobago national citizen, currently based in St. John's. She's passionate about educating and advocating for groups historically excluded from accessing the same equal rights as others. She focuses on anti-racism, anti-Black racism, and intersectionality in the ways in which race intersects with power and perception. Raven graduated from St. Francois Girls College and the Polytechnic Institute to the University of the West Indies. There, she graduated with honors with a special bachelor's degree in history. She moved to St. John's in 2018 and graduated from Memorial University with a Bachelor of Education with a specialty in intermediate and secondary. Education has always been a driving force of Raven's life and was one of the main pull factors to her deciding to begin her life as an immigrant. She spearheaded several initiatives in St. John's, such as Backpacks NL, Back to School program, and Cultural Inclusion Camp, geared towards inclusion, diversity, and equity. I will say that Sylvia mentioned to me, she was like, she's not an early childhood educator, she's great with the older kids, and apparently this camp was amazing. And so she is an activist, current co-founder and co-president of Black Lives Matter Newfoundland and Labrador, active member of the Anti-Racism Coalition, board member of Girls Rock NL, and an anti-racism consultant with Ravensong Consulting, which is how she is joining us here today. So welcome, Raven. Welcome to our wonderful panel. We have Bernice Hancock, Executive Director of the Community Education Network for Southwest Newfoundland. Is that right? I've been practicing that. We have Kristen Pittman, who is the Manager of Education and Training with the Qalipu First Nation Band. We have Gail Brinston from Daybreak Parent-Child Center, Valerie Collins, Executive Director of Family Childcare Connections, and the wonderful Debbie Ingram, who came back from her annual leave to be here because she had so much to say, who is the Director of Early Childhood Development at First Light, and they are all amazing. I'm really looking forward to this. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Would anyone else like some water? Bernice, you want water? Thank you. Raven, I'm going to get you a bottle of water. All right, over to you.
Firstly, I'd like to say it is a great pleasure to be here today, and it's a great honor. I mentioned earlier that while I do not have my first degree or my second in early childhood care, I did spend 3 years being a child advocate worker, as well as working in the vulnerable sector with people who really identify as that. Secondly, I think it's very important for me to be here today because I think it was very brave of you all to mention the fact that childhood, early care, learning, education, healthcare has not been the safest systems for racialized people, migrant people in Newfoundland, in Canada, around the world. I think that's incredibly important to address that, and I hope that as we go into this panel, we keep that all in mind. So, without further ado, I would like to start with my first question. Early childhood education is a right, but it's not a reality for many children and families in our province. Why did you start the program you operate? What community needs were being met elsewhere, and how were your community members excluded from our existing services? And I'd like to pass this question to Gail Winston of the Daybreak Parent Childcare Center.
Thank you. I want to start by saying I didn't create the program. Daybreak is actually celebrating its 50th anniversary tomorrow. And so it's been around a long, long time. But initially it was created to serve mostly single moms, and if it were today, it would probably include single dads as well, who were home and isolated, and childcare was a barrier to them. It was cost prohibitive, and Daybreak also acknowledged that parents were teachers as well as the ECEs. So back in the day when it first started, obviously there were no trained ECEs. It started in the basement of Wesley Church as a very small program, and parents came, they were full running right from the very beginning, and they were so successful because they were successful in uniting parents who otherwise were isolated. And what we know about early childhood is that isolation puts children at higher risk. It also impacts the parent. And it's funny because this morning on the way here, I was listening to the LCN, and they were talking about the survey that was done with, people being satisfied with their way of life in Newfoundland. And one of the things was social connections. And I said, it's ironic because in Newfoundland I don't think, we ever sit silent for too long. We have those social connections, and it's so important for young children too. But I also want to just say that, children come from all different families. They come with different abilities, and parents themselves come with different abilities, and we need to find a way to recognize that all children are not the same. We need trained educators. We need diversity training, especially now. I know when I first started in this field, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity. Today is very different. And if you walked into our programs, you would see a very diverse population of children and parents. So it's really important that early childhood educators are trained to recognize what the different cultures are, the different beliefs, the different values. Because when a child comes in, they have that right to have that in their early childhood program. We have a situation now where we have a lot of children coming from Ukraine who don't speak English, who are entering into our programs and the school system. And they deserve to be able to communicate with their peers and to be able to be supported in learning what they need to learn to make those social connections.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I'd like to ask the same question, and I'm related, of Debbie Ingram from the Child Development site. So, question 1 is, early child education is a right, but it's not a reality for many children and families in our province. So, can you express, what are some of the community needs that are being met elsewhere that is met at your organization?
I have my problems apparently. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Hi, welcome, thank you. Early child education is a need for many Indigenous families in our community. That became quite clear to us in the urban Indigenous population here in St. John's when we started to provide that wraparound care services for our families, for our supporters, for the community in general. It became quite evident to us. So what we did is we did a needs assessment at First Light. Out of that needs assessment came that not only do we require childcare, but there's that deep need for that cultural connection. When families move here, they move here into the city, sometimes for employment opportunities, post-secondary education, a better life. A lot of times that they come here, they don't have the support networks in place, they're missing those cultural connections. At the Childcare Center, we strive to provide these cultural connections. It's really important for us that the children are in the center, that they feel a sense of belonging, they still feel a sense of acceptance. I apologize. If they're feeling that sense of belonging, they feel that sense of acceptance, they will themselves thrive. They're going to learn better, they're going to develop better. We know that as society, so it's really important for us to be there for the whole entire family, not just the child. Along with that type of support, one of the things that we also notice a lot with our families is that we have financial barriers that sometimes come into place as well. So we're aware of that. In order for people to get a child care space, they require funding in order to do it, whether that's personal funding from elsewhere. One of the programs that we have in place is subsidy. In order for them to get that space, they need that funding. In order to get that funding from subsidy, they require a confirmed childcare space. So there's definitely a gap in the system there. We provide that support to our families when they come in. So we'll still bring the child in. We support the family. We know how important it is for them to receive those connections. We support them during the gap period. That might take 30 days for them to receive these supports. It's just overall providing a service in general for them, not just for the child.
Thank you. I feel like if I'm getting a very current thing between your and your response about the gap that we're seeing and how to really reach that gap and bring everybody together. Bridging together? Yeah, very much so. Okay, I would like to ask the same question. Bernice Hancock of the AD of the Community Education Network for Southwest Newfoundland. Wow, that's a long one.
CENBC for short. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to Valerie for inviting me to sit on the panel. And you're right, Mary, anybody here in this audience certainly could have been a member of the panel and certainly have their story to share as well. I guess for me, I bring the rural perspective, rural and remote communities. And for a lot of us, when we talk about options, and I go back a ways, I'm certainly probably would be considered a senior now, the same issues that I faced as a young mom in my 20s, women and families are facing today. And that is very troubling in and of itself, that we've been fighting the same fight for many, many years. And in many of our rural and remote communities, even to this day, there are no options. So when we talk about options, there are absolutely no options. So for our organization, and we had our roots as the Community Education Initiative for the Port Court Peninsula. There were no options on the Port Court Peninsula throughout southwestern Newfoundland at that time, and we're talking about the early 90s. And there was an opportunity through the Community Action Program for Children to avail of funding to develop family resource centers throughout. And we partnered with our school board, and our local, it was a local school board, then the regional school board. We partnered with the school board setting up family resource programs in the school. So that's where young children and their parents could come for programming, for support, parenting programs, there was drop-in play, all sorts of learning through play opportunities and socialization for both parents and caregivers and the children, of course. And it was the children first. So through that initiative, we got together with a lot of other partners in the community and formed a very first family resource center that was on the Port Court Peninsula in Piccadilly School at the time. So again, and I don't know how many people are familiar, but the Port Court Peninsula is rather isolated area. We serve a lot of rural and fairly isolated communities here in southwestern Newfoundland. So because there was no other service, and the school has been and continues to be, and the school board, Mr. Osborne continues to be one of our key partners in the establishment of both family resource centers, healthy baby clubs, and also licensed preschool and childcare programs throughout the area. So just wanted to kind of acknowledge that. So just to recognize that there still exists not a lot. And want to take advantage of this, Mr. Osborne, that you're here on the Port Court Peninsula. We have a preschool that's been there since '98, and we used to have transportation subsidies. They no longer exist. There were 25 children of 3 and 4-year-old children in the catchment area. We had 9 this year because of transportation was the issue. And that's not just on the Port Court Peninsula, that exists everywhere. So if we're really truly going to talk about inclusion, let's talk about it. And what that means is flexible policies and procedures that's based on the need of the family. And they don't have to jump through hoops to get a subsidy. And whether somebody's mom or dad are working should not be a factor in whether they get to go to early learning and childcare program. So that's sort of was at the heart of, the early years last forever. We have tons and tons of research that we could quote that. We know how important that is, and what's happening is that many of our children are getting left behind because they don't have the opportunities. And kudos to the government to recognizing that the fact that the schools, especially in our rural and remote areas, are the key in terms of kids being able to come with their backpacks on as young as 2 years old, coming into our family resource center, and younger, and ready on going to school, right? So it's that whole concept, and we can collectively do that, and we are doing that, and we've been doing that for some time in southwestern Newfoundland.
Thank you for that. Okay, I would like to go next to Kristen Pittman, who is the Manager of Education and Training for the Qalipu First Nation Band.
The Qalipu First Nation Band is a bit unique in the way that we are a landless band, so we have no reserves. So therefore, we have no registered centers or no daycare centers that is band operated. So we are very involved and have been now for several years within the K-12 school system. So we've been providing Indigenous learning through our programs and services. But we were getting a lot of requests for visits with early childhood centers. And due to the large workload and the busyness of our programs, we weren't able to really accommodate those requests to the best of our ability. There was a real identified need in our communities for more. So when we were able to apply for funding, we took the opportunity to do so. And from then, the Eastern Sun Early Learning Program was formed. And we have been operating that program now since January of this year. So that program includes staff in Western and Central Newfoundland. Our Western staff is here today. And we are able to have centers opt into our program. So far it's been quite successful, but the biggest need that we've been able to help fulfill is providing Indigenous learning within centers. Because right now, as we all know, our education is quite colonized, and Indigenous learning is quite lacking. So by starting this learning with our earliest learners, we're not just influencing their learning, but we're also influencing the learning of their families as well, and getting that conversation going. And also helping form the identity of our Indigenous youth. For us, if we want to affect any change on our members, we have to affect change on the population as a whole in Western and Central Newfoundland and Labrador. So we have to do that. So it's a bit on a broader scale, but we're very excited to be able to do that and help try to fulfill the need and help fill that gap just a little bit.
Thank you so much for that. Honestly, I keep hearing a lot of that coming back, the fact that one theme I keep hearing recurring is the fact that y'all keep saying it's not just about the child, but the family as well. So it goes much more than just early childhood care. It's really framing and setting up how people interact with their families and how it's within, and I think that's really beautiful and very, very important. Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Valerie Collins who is the Executive Director of Family Childcare Connections.
Thank you for inviting me here today. Early childhood education is not a reality for many children and families in our province. Currently, programs are available for working parents who can afford it and who are lucky enough to find childcare, and there are those that have access to part-time family resource programs. Family and Childcare Connections began in early 2000 from funding provided by the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. At the time, postal workers working shift work were having difficulty finding childcare. From a needs assessment completed by CUPW, it was indicated that a family resource center would be a needed incentive to attract childcare providers to take care for children of CUPW workers. They would benefit from the toy lending library, play groups, and training that would be free to any providers caring for children of CUPW members. At about the same time, the first legislation for family child care was also being developed. The Resource Center took on the contract from government to develop the Family Child Care Agency, which now offers the same benefits to regulated family child care as it did for the child care providers using the Resource Center. The agency received their first license in 2003. The agency has continued to grow until recent years. Numbers of regulated child care providers have dropped since 2017, but are now picking up again. Family child care is another option for parents who require care for their children so they can go to work. With legislation developed for family child care, parents can now have another choice of quality early learning and care for their children. Regulated family childcare also provides an opportunity for parents in rural areas of the province. A town may not have the population or infrastructure to operate a childcare center. However, family childcare can be set up in most any home. Unfortunately, childcare is still only accessible to working parents who are lucky enough to find care. With limited regulated childcare spaces, whether it be center-based or family childcare, quality early learning and care is still not available to every child.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that is a very good note to end on the first question, that it definitely is not available to every child, even though every child matters. Okay. So, question number 2. And I actually am a history teacher, so I feel very much at home. Over the next 5 years, the federal and provincial governments are investing $347 million to support early childhood education in our province. But we have a long way to go, and we know how long that is, to make sure that this investment reaches every child. So my question, I would like to start with Debbie Ingram from the first slide. How do you, what kind of supports, funding, or training would help you serve children and families better? And what regulations will really get in the way of that?
Okay. I just want to start off by saying that the pandemic has changed our needs. It's changed our staffing needs. The way we used to operate prior to the pandemic and the way we operate now is totally different. I definitely recommend that we implement some sort of funding to accommodate these needs. So right now, if a staff were to show up, call in, work because they have a runny nose or a cough, that's something that they can come to work with prior to the pandemic. They obviously can't come to work now due to our current regulations and policies. What that means, it's putting a strain on us. It's not only putting a strain on our ratios for the child care itself, but it's putting a strain on our actual programming, and it's putting a strain on the staff's programming time. In order to be able to deliver the programming, these culturally appropriate quality programs that we have, we need to give these staff the programming time to do it. Unfortunately, because of what the regulations and policies are saying now, we just don't have the same manpower that we had pre-pandemic. So that's definitely a change point in what our needs are right now versus, say, 2 years ago. Sorry, read my notes here, I apologize. I also want to add in with regards to the training that you asked about. I invite our program consultants, I invite our inclusion consultants, I invite our social workers, I invite everybody to come in, get involved, sit down, have a drum circle, sit down and learn about fancy shawl dancing, learn some language teachers. We want you to get involved. We want you to learn. It's the only way that you're going to be able to support is if you actually learn. There's formalized training you can have if you don't want to come into and get involved with us. Systematic racism does exist. It does exist in our current policies and regulations. It does exist. It can either interfere, it can prevent it, it can interfere with it. It does. We had a program consultant walk into our child care center and shut us down right in the middle of smudging. We were smudging, they shut us down. They told me, halt, stop, don't do it anymore until we have permission from the Department of Education. Systemic racism does exist, and we need to put a stop to this. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing that. That was quite a sobering thought. And it also shows just how 20th century racism and systemicism appears in community and in public. So thank you. Kristen Pittman.
With the earmarking of funds, I think it's very important to keep in mind the importance of indigenizing our centres across the province. You know, it's of course we need to take care of our staff and the spots, but we also need to make sure that our children are being represented within the walls of these centres. So I know we were lucky enough, for example, to gather and to obtain short-term funding, but you know, our programs and programs such as ours cannot stop as of March 31st. You know, these need to continue. The need is there. We need to make sure that we're helping our youth form a healthy sense of self-identity, and we're helping ensure that our culture is not only revitalized, but renewed and continued throughout the generations to follow. So we need to make sure that we put our money where our mouth is and make sure that that there is a importance placed on indigenizing the centers. And because it's just so important, and we see the effects of that, and we see the positive outcomes that's occurring with these types of activities. So I believe that's something that should be definitely kept in mind as that money is allocated.
Definitely, so I quite agree. Okay, and I would like to ask Gail, would you like me to repeat the question? Actually, yeah. So I will, because it's been a little while since I asked it. Over the next 5 years, the federal and provincial governments are investing $347 million to support early childhood education in our province. But we have a long way to go to make sure this investment reaches every child. So what kind of supports, like funding or training, would help you serve children and families better?
I think one of the things, I've always lived on the Avalon, and you know, there's a number of programs available here, but when you get outside of the Avalon and you start to go across the province, I think the biggest challenge for a lot of families is actually having a program in their area that they can access, and the other challenge is finding qualified staff. And I know that the provincial government right now is working on that, you know, I understand right now that there's a number of people on a wait list. It would be great if we could get everybody off those wait lists and get them into school. I also think we have to recognize that when children are in an early learning environment that is of high quality, they have better outcomes in life. All the research has shown that. And while it may cost money now up front to, you know, put these things in place, down the road it pays for itself because the outcomes are more successful for a lot of these children. So I think the biggest barrier right now in this province is probably accessibility. And hopefully as the fees go down and the subsidy hopefully will change, I think is a direction we need to go in. And I just want to speak to the transportation piece that you spoke about. And like I said, Daybreak is going to be 50. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary. And one of the pillars of our programs has always been transportation for parents who couldn't access it. Because it's great to have a program, but if you can't get there, you can't access the program. And a lot of parents, for a number of reasons, you know, looking at our clientele, it could be because physically it's too far, or they may have 5 children, and how do you tow everybody to drop this one child off? Or it could be that a parent is suffering from some type of health issue, whether it's physical or mental, and maybe just don't have the motivation. A lot of parents we see have really high social anxiety. So to have to take your child and go in there and see other parents and see the early childhood educators, that's a huge barrier. And those are the children that are probably most at risk because they're in homes that are probably not appropriately being stimulated for the children. So transportation, Bernice, I absolutely agree with you, is a major barrier, and it shouldn't be a barrier for a child to be able to access a system. And within the school system itself, I mean, you have the school buses outside of whatever the kilometers are, but if you were in K to 12, you would have access to transportation.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
Just in terms of,
Yeah, actually, you were next.
I didn't want to butt in if there was a, yeah, thank you for that. I think that sometimes we forget, and I understand the reality and Avalon, certainly you have your struggles here as well. But if we look at the large geographic area that we serve, for example, in southwestern Newfoundland, and I remember someone visiting from the province and wondering if they could get to Port aux Basques and Berger and Ramy on the same day. I said, well, we're going to have a long day because we got breaks. So it's just right, just to understand, you know, and of course we got Port Peninsula, so there's a large geographic area, no public transportation, absolutely no public transportation. So if a family, for whatever reason, and sometimes it's, you know, families who are living on a modest or middle income, but the only car they have goes to Stephenville to go to work. There's no way to get their child to the preschool program or the early learning program, right, to them, because they do not have the vehicle, right? So those are the struggles. That's the reality. So if I were to say sort of one line, flexible programs and services based on individual needs. And when I say individual needs, that's the community and the families and the children's needs. So rolling out a program, whether it be across Canada or across the province, it really can't be one size fits all, right? It has to be based on. So when a family, of course, would like their child to go, or perhaps don't even know that there's an early learning or childcare program in their community, but given the opportunity, we break down all those barriers so the family, and if that's the principle we work with, if that's really truly the principle we work with, please work with us on that, because we can help, and probably in the most cost-effective way, organizations like ours, the nonprofit sector, can help then, right, ensure that family and child gets access together. So if that's really where we're coming from here, then I think we have a solution, because I know there's some really good nonprofit organizations right throughout. The other issue for us is that, the pre-K pilot, I think, is a wonderful thing. The reality for us is that we have many of the early educators, early childhood educators. What does that mean when there's higher, and I wouldn't blame them for I probably, I give them a reference and they would go along to a higher position. What does that mean for our family resource programs and our existing licensed preschool programs in small communities, right? So the rollout of the pre-K program, how does that work differently for communities like ours, right? Because it is a good thing. It is a very good thing. But then we're not going to take away the existing things that we have in the area either to provide pre-K programs. So just that's what I see as some of as we navigate. But I think if it's really based on the community and family needs, then we have those things addressed, like transportation. And we've done that in the past. We actually had the only taxi service that was on the peninsula. They actually purchased a bus, and we could and our staff would ride with them, and they were trained technicians, car seats, to be able to put the car seats in, and we worked, for years we did that, and then they brought the transportation subsidy. And we didn't have the funding for all families to return. So that's the reality for rural and remote, and I know there's lots of people around here from rural and remote communities, but those are the reality, and we've been involved, for 30 years really, and I've been around quite some time, but in licensed childcare as well, we've been involved, and it is difficult. There is a lot, and I know everybody here on the panel, when we talk about license, there is a lot of balls in the air that you have to juggle with regard to, supporting your staff, ensuring that all the regulations are met, available space, which schools for us have been really kind, and we've been able to renovate those spaces, but there's a whole lot that goes with that, and a whole lot of expertise that you need to be able to run a licensed program as well, right? So, those are just some of the concerns that exist that are probably more prevalent in rural communities.
Yes, I completely understand that, because I think the only reason why I'm here today is because my mother sent me and my 6 siblings to school back in Trinidad, and it would take me 6 hours each day. I would wake up at 4 o'clock, and then I would go to school, and then I would come back in the evening and the same thing. And we had public transportation, but it was done more by class and whatnot. So we had the poor bus and the good bus, and the poor bus, you already know, wasn't the best circumstances. So I do very much resonates with me deeply just how much transportation can be such a huge signifier if you're able to be present, be there, and get that. And also, I like to go back to what you all said about it being in the education, being an investment. Because of that investment my mother gave, I am here today. But I was probably back in Trinidad, probably doing something important as well, but I wasn't here. So, last and definitely not least, Valerie.
Okay, so Family and Childcare Connections has already received some funding from the investment. So we're excited to already hopefully be starting the work that needs to happen. The expansion project allows for us now to go open 3 new offices, 2 in rural Newfoundland and 1 in Labrador, which will employ 3 new home visitors. Offices will be set up and provide the same support childcare providers access in our St. John's and Corner Brook offices. Home visitors will provide support to childcare providers hoping to set up regulated childcare homes. This will create more spaces which allows more children and families greater access to quality early learning and childcare. Increased funding will also provide the necessary training to ensure quality program is provided. This is year one of a 3-year project, which will evaluate progress at the end of year one and hopefully negotiate further funding for any new supports not considered previously. You spoke about the regulations are a very important part of a quality childcare program. They ensure the children are kept healthy and safe, as well as provide guidelines around quality. Processes, however, more than regulations, seem to get in the way of our work. Unfortunately, there is much red tape in the process of approval. Paperwork has to go through many hands, which can cause frustrating roadblocks leading to withdrawals of applications, which sometimes means less spaces. Together, we're trying to work through these issues. We do have concerns around how some regulations may affect the process for childcare providers who live in rural areas of Newfoundland and Labrador. Their approach to childcare may differ from ours. For example, I have already had a conversation with policymakers around menus and the serving of wild game. Currently, wild game is not to be served. However, this will become an issue in areas of the province where this may be the only meat available to families. This is only one small example of the concerns, and your concern with the smudging is something we have not come across that yet. But I feel as we go into more areas of the province where family child care has not been accessible, I think we're going to come across things like that will have to be dealt with as well.
I agree, and thank you very much, because I think it's so important what we as a society deem as regular food and unregular food, and it often tends to be quite racist in intentions, and that also affects us very deeply, and it also affects children. I think working in the education system has taught me that children simply learn, and they learn so fast. It's as early as 3-4 years old, which brings us to our third question, and I think that you'll really let us into it. Education is not a neutral space. Throughout our history, education has been used as a tool of colonialism, patriarchy, and other kinds of oppression. What hidden curriculum does your work seek to challenge, and how can early child education support social justice and reconciliation? I would actually like to, first, I would like to ask Gail.
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, if you came to our program, we're already really diverse in our population. We have expanded, and we have a parent program that we very much welcome parents to come, and we have different groups that are geared to different parents. So one of the things that we've recently done is a lot of newcomer parents and parents who are from Newfoundland itself. They come to a group and they have a cooking session. And so they bring in their cultural food and they cook it and they share those ideas. And our executive director is actually here, and our children's program director. And we've talked about how we can incorporate the culture of our clientele into our menus. So again, it's prohibitive sometimes when we want to look at certain things. So I would like to see that be addressed in terms of where we can go with that, because if a child is in a program, they have the right to be acknowledged as an individual and have their culture acknowledged. My culture may not be their culture, but I still need to celebrate their culture as much as I would expect children to acknowledge my culture. We come upon that a lot of times, like around Christmas and Ramadan and Easter and Halloween, and how do you balance that out with everybody in your group? So we've kind of, had an acknowledgement of anybody who's in the group, if it's a celebration for them, it's a celebration for them. And it doesn't mean you have to partake, it just means you have to acknowledge and respect it, because we can't just have Christmas and Easter and Good Friday. That's no longer our norm. We have to recognize that other cultures come with other celebrations, and we should all be celebrating it because we're all part of the Newfoundland culture. We are Canadians, we're all Canadians, and we should be trying to bring that into our programs so that it becomes the norm and not just like, oh gosh, let's do this and now we're covered. And I think one of the things about that is finding people probably from other backgrounds, like diversity within your workplace, like for the ECEs. I know in our workplace we have people who come from a different culture, and it's wonderful. We learn so much from our co-workers, and to have people on your staff who bring a different perspective and bring an opportunity to learn. And we've actually done the smudging with staff, and it saddens me about what happened. But it's such a spiritual thing, and children have that right to be raised with whatever their family values and believes, and to be respected for that. It's part of who they are. I can't imagine somebody saying to me, you can't celebrate what's important to you, or you need to change your values because they're not the same as mine. That's not fair, and especially when you have young children. Young children are so accepting of each other. They don't see the differences. They see the similarities, and children will naturally kind of gravitate to each other and play. And I think we need to get that mindset that we need to look at our similarities and respect each other for what we all bring to the table, because we all bring something different. And I have to say, from my experience, what I've gained in working in a diverse population has enriched my knowledge and my experience every day.
Thank you very much for that. Kristen? Within our department, particularly the Cultural Education Division, perhaps our biggest focus has been, over the past few years, curriculum change. So as we all know, I don't think anybody would disagree, the curriculum of the province, be it K-12 or early childhood learning, is very colonized. So, and in fact, a lot of us are influenced by colonization in many different ways. So with over the past 2 years, we have been striving to have a MOU signed that was just recently signed by the majority of the partners. I think, Mr. Osborne, your signature is on there as well. And that one is for the K-12 school system to indigenize the curriculum. So that was a big effort and priority of ours. So we're very excited to see that work its way through the system. So in order to, as curriculum is up for renewal, there'll be efforts made to indigenize that curriculum going forward. So we want those efforts now to continue into early childhood centers, so especially within our ward areas in Western and Central Newfoundland. So in order to combat the hidden curriculums that we see and the effects of colonization in terms of how we educate our children, we want to help support that and bring in the Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing into those classrooms. And a big way that we're going to be trying to help combat that is, introducing and building a pathway from our children to our elders in order to bridge that gap, to continue that learning in that regard. So it's just small efforts, and they add up, but it's just the more efforts we do, the more we'll reverse that ways and the effects of colonization and move towards a path to reconciliation.
Thank you very much. Debbie?
Just like I was talking about the smudging, we had to challenge that. So you're talking about hidden curriculum, we had to challenge it. We had to fight. We had to actually fight so that we're allowed to do that smudging. We need people, again, to be educated, self-educate, share your teaching, share what you know, share that knowledge so that you can truly understand it and that you can support the population. Come on out to cultural events. We have National Indigenous People Day coming up on June 21st. Come on out, do some dancing, do some drumming, do some smudging, eat some food from the lands. We want you to be a part of it. At our Childcare Center, we have the children are immersed into it daily with their activities. We have scraps of sealskin in our art area. We have scraps of hide in our art area. That little tiny piece of scrap is going to trigger so much information. A child might be saying, what's this? What's this, Miss Deb? That little scrap of hide. You can talk about going out and hunting and getting a moose with Poppy on the weekend, and how that moose now can provide food for you, can provide clothing, it can help us to make our drums. We have moose antlers at our childcare center that we use to create a game. We did like a ring toss game with the children, made these rings. So they're immersed into the culture, but along with that diversity, we also welcome other cultures in. We've had people come in and talk about Chinese New Year, talk about their foods, actually make the foods, make the dumplings with the children. We've had Korean musicians come in, do their traditional drumming with us, where they have all ages in their group, children, parents, grandparents, whatnot, in these groups. We have had our Filipino dancers come in. I may say this wrong, so I apologize to anybody in the room. Salakut dancing. They shared some Salakut dancing with us and shared their traditions with us. We have gender-neutral bathrooms at the Childcare Center. We challenge those gender roles. Sometimes children refer to themselves as a girl. Sometimes they'll refer to themselves as to a boy. We have a child in our Childcare Center right now who is a male child who comes and wears pretty dresses and wears their hair in braids and wears pigtails and likes pretty things. And they're totally accepted by the other children. It's just a natural part of their day. We have a teacher in our Childcare Center who is a male teacher who is also a drag queen. So it's opening up these children to other things. He talks about how he likes to wear his makeup and how he likes to wear wigs and have his hair pretty. One day he'll be showing up in jeans and a sweatshirt. The next day he'll have glamorous nails on to share with the children. It's so important. Diversity is a wide variety of things. We also have another teacher in our Childcare Center who is deaf. It's teaching children that there are multiple ways to communicate. There's not just one way to do anything or anything at all. There's not just one way. It opens them up, and this is normalizing it for children. It's just everybody learns in different ways. Everybody looks different. Everybody has a uniqueness. When children grow up with a diversity at early years, they're going to challenge those biases later in life. They're going to be up to challenge it. If they grow it up where it's a natural part of their environment early in the years, they're going to grow up and they're going to challenge these biases later in life. And yeah, so I just welcome everybody to get involved. You're more than welcome. Come on down. National Indigenous People Day on June 21st and join in and learn about the culture. We're all in.
That sounds like a grand old time, to
It
be
is.
honest. I think I may be hopping in.
Good.
Yeah, I would like Valerie.
Okay, I feel like family childcare. I have to say I struggled a little bit with this question because I feel we haven't experienced a lot of this in our family childcare homes, but I did some thinking about it, and you know, as family childcare providers, we strive to provide a neutral space for all children. By providing a program that accepts all children and allowing them to play in an environment that is creative and open-ended, allows them to practice many roles. For example, most childcare homes practice emergent curriculum, which is child-led. By providing the appropriate setting, children can try out their ideas in a fun space with no judgment. It is the responsibility of the agency to encourage our childcare providers to promote an environment that is inclusive and allows for creativity. We all need to learn to recognize the hidden curriculum that creates biases and ensure we provide a setting that allows children to be themselves. Early childhood educators can support social injustice and reconciliation by providing more opportunities for professional learning, which can be accessed from our community partners, which I will be in touch. Once we feel comfortable with this understanding, they can develop culturally reflective practices in their programs and begin the children's understanding and acceptance without learning biases. The more education they have, the better they are equipped to deal with inappropriate or inaccurate ideas.
Thank you.
I would like to ask Bernice.
Thank you. I think one of the things over the past year, and since I guess the first Truth and Reconciliation Day, is that the profound effect that finding the unmarked graves of so many Indigenous children. And I think that has created an awareness for me, having an Indigenous partner and thinking that, if we went not that long ago, we're talking about 96 when the last residential school closed. And I was thinking, my goodness, that could have been my children, and what a profound impact. So how education has been used, as a tool to control people, right? And rather than celebrate diversity. So when I look at, like for our own organization, as much as we possibly can, we look at sort of advancing, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we also understand that that's an ongoing process. So we need to make sure that we're well informed and educated and have knowledge and understanding of all those issues that you so eloquently talked about in terms of, with the different cultures, people of color, Indigenous people. There's a lot of white faces in Newfoundland, right? So everybody should be celebrated. Our LGBT plus community, persons who are differently abled, right? With different types of disabilities, so that we're all celebrated together. And from my own children's perspective, who now are two young men, 35 and 32, I'm just looking at the experience that they had. And I remember in grade 1, they were talking about families, and Marcus stood up and said, "My aunt loves a woman." And of course, everybody had stopped. But that diversity and had children, different nationalities, they're Indigenous themselves, but people with disabilities, and all that was part of their life, and how that help to shape who they are. And I think that every child, so when we talk about early childhood, that's the opportunity to start at such an early age and to shape, so we don't have, people who think that, okay, that our skin should be a certain color and we all should be able to, have certain abilities, and we should all be straight, we should all be, those ideas will be obsolete, and we'll all be well-rounded and inclusive people and communities.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Actually, we have a saying back in Trinidad. It's called prevention is better than cure. And it essentially means that if you treat the disease before it actually happens, you never have to deal with the disease or the harmful effects of it. So I try to go with that.
Yes.
And this brings us to our fourth and final question. I must say it's been quite interesting to be here with you ladies. I'm quite having a good time. So, my fourth and final question. While adults might be hesitant to discuss race with young children are already forming ideas about race and expressing racist ideas that they learn from the world around them.
Did we miss a question?
Yes, the actual question.
According to Dr. Jessica Sullivan, the co-author of a study published by the American Psychological Association, open quotation marks, children are capable of thinking about all sorts of complex topics at a very young age. Even if adults don't talk to kids about race, children will work to make sense of their world and will come up with their own ideas, which may be inaccurate or detrimental. So my question, what responsibility do we have to promote anti-racism in early years setting? And how can educators challenge racism in an early years context? And the third one, how can educators confront their own unconscious bias? Because we all have it. Okay, this brings me to Debbie. Would you like to go?
Sure. The bottom line is we need to include diversity from birth. That's the bottom line. Whether that's through books, toys, games, what have you, you want to have diversity of different cultures and different races. Like I said before, it's not just race, it's culture in general, whatever that culture is. Children are going to ask questions. They're going to ask questions. We just need to keep it simple. Don't make it overcomplicated. Asking the color of skin should be no different than asking somebody's hair color, somebody's eye color. You just want to keep it simple. At our children, Indigenous children and non-Indigenous children are immersed in the culture. It's in our daily activities every single day. It's just normal life to them. This gives the Indigenous children an opportunity to connect with that culture, but it also gives the non-Indigenous children exposure to a culture that's different than their home life. Those children are going to grow up with a deep understanding and appreciation for the Indigenous culture. This is reconciliation. These are our future leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love it. And I would like to ask Gail. If you want, I can repeat this. Yeah, if you want, I can repeat the question. Or I can repeat the question. It's really about the fact that parents are. It's difficult for adults to discuss race. It really is, in my experience, working in community. It's one of the hardest conversations to have. However, children, they have no qualms. They are so open, they're so welcoming, and they always want to talk. They'll ask me, why was your hair longer yesterday, but it's blonde now? And I'm like, it's a wig, you want to learn? And we go on, we discuss that. What I have seen as well is the opposite of that, where my niece, one of my nieces, I have quite a few, she was 7 years old, and I remember she came up to me and she asked me, am I ugly because I'm so dark-skinned? She has a much deeper shade than mine. And she said, because children were saying that her skin reminded her of feces. Kids can be hurtful, kids can be cruel. And it's really important for us to address that and to put that. So that's the spirit for those questions. And it's all answers are right, because it all comes from our heart.
I just wanted to talk about what I see as the role of early childhood educators. What is their responsibility to address anti-racism? Again, if you go back to the core beliefs of an ECE, it's accepting every child as they are and who they are. So I would be in conflict to be in a program and not respect those things. So, but I also have a responsibility, if I see that happening within the workplace, to try and address it. Which, would go through different mechanisms depending on where you were working to. I would hope that, early childhood educators in any program would not, try to come with those biases. But amongst the children are not the problem. I think a lot of times when children come in and they make statements like, your skin reminds me of, that's learned behavior, and I think that's why it's so important that we work with parents and we embrace them, not only to offer what they can bring to the table, but also to learn from us and take away. There are other cultures that deserve the same respect. Having things in your classroom that are reflective of a diverse population. Having your books in there, whether it's in a different language, whether it's in sign language, having different cultural music. I mean, we all know what Newfoundland music is, but it's important that we also put in other music that represents the children who are in our population. And that should become the norm. It shouldn't be, we're going to listen to a special kind of music today. We're just going to listen to music. Again, with the meal planning, I think, that's another big piece. This is what, Janice and her family eat, so we're going to try that today. And, that's a wonderful learning opportunity for children. And then go home then and share that, and hopefully, it'll excite a little bit at home that they'll recognize that was a good meal. Maybe they'd eat that. Maybe they don't eat anything else. Just trying to get the last of the question. And how can educators confront their own unconscious biases? I think most educators are pretty reflective in their practice. And, when we come upon a challenge, we come away, sometimes we talk to our co-workers or our friends, and sometimes we just sit and think about what's the source of the challenge. I think education is the key. And you had mentioned about, accepting all types of families. It doesn't matter who you love as long as you love, And so, I think the more you become informed, the less you're able to keep a bias, because it's just not supported. When you learn why certain people do do things the way that they do it, and you learn the culture behind it and the beliefs and the values, it becomes a whole new understanding. And like I said, we did smudging, and I've been exposed to smudging many times, and we did it in the workplace, and it was just so nice to share that with our co-worker. She was so excited. She was nervous, and she was so excited about sharing it because it was a new process for her. And I don't think there was anybody in the whole center that partook that didn't come away with like an interest to learn more and a respect for what the ceremony actually means. And I think it's really important that we instill that in our children, because what they come to know about getting along with others in those very early formative years is what will follow them.
Thank you very much. Kristen.
In my opinion, two of the ways to combat racism within our education system is education and diversity. So education, not only with our children, but our educators as well. So within our programming, we see a lot of hesitancy to carry out Indigenous education with students because they're afraid to offend. They're afraid to say something wrong. They're afraid to do something wrong. So part of our priorities is professional learning sessions with educators in order to provide a safe space to allow them to immerse themselves within cultural learning and provide a safe space to ask questions as well. We won't be offended if you ask a question. I'd rather hear it and we be able to provide insight. So allowing and empowering educators to feel confident to bring those teachings within their centers is a big key as well that we need to keep in mind. Also with diversity, when we enter our centers, not only do we want to see a diversity in participants, but also in their space. So there's been mention of books. That is a big gap, especially with Indigenous books by Indigenous authors. There is a very big void there. I know in order to combat that void, I have a bedtime series, a video series that I do with my daughter, and we read a different book every week in video, and it's to highlight and give a platform to Indigenous authors, which we don't normally see in mainstream. So in making sure that we have those diverse resources within a center, not only allows us to ensure diversity, but celebrate diversity as well, because we really want to make sure that it's the norm, not something is different. I know I'll speak as a mom, I'll put my mom cap on for a second, but I have a daughter, she's 6 years old. So she attended an extremely supportive early childhood learning center for the past few years, and this year she entered kindergarten. So in her early learning center, her educators really did a fantastic job of infusing Indigenous learning within the centers. They started every morning with a talking circle, and they really were able to highlight and empower her as an Indigenous girl, and she really enjoyed that. So she also loves to provide community teaching. So like I said, she's my co-host for the video series. We've been doing that now for 2 years. When she entered the K-12 school system, she entered kindergarten this year, things drastically changed. So she attends a large school, and she came home quite upset many times this year because she sees herself represented nowhere in her school. She sees absolutely no posters on the wall, there's no books in the classroom unless she brings them in, and there's no representation, to the point where she came home and she's like, what's wrong with me? Am I different? Is there no other Mi'kmaq students in this school, when I know for a fact there's probably 50% of that school is Indigenous? But she's coming home feeling like she's different, feeling like she's less than, when in fact she should never feel that way. And especially in an area of the province where there's such a large Indigenous population. But it doesn't matter about the quantity of population. We should be making sure that we're putting our efforts into celebrating the diversity that we have and celebrating our students, and to ensure that they are forming a healthy sense of self-identity, which I've mentioned a couple times, but that sense of identity is so important because that shapes how they carry themselves through their life and how they feel about themselves. So that is something that we need to keep in mind and make sure that we're celebrating, not just acknowledging, and not just acknowledging, but celebrating.
Thank you so much. I think you have mentioned it before, and I love it because it reminds me of one of my favorite RuPaul stated sayings, remember who you are. And if you don't know, you can't have a healthy sense of self, then how are you going to love somebody else? So. I do drop it. I have it. Valerie.
Okay, so as early childhood educators, we do have a responsibility to promote anti-racism in early years settings. In order to recognize that racism may be occurring, we need to be able to recognize our own unconscious biases. It is our responsibility to promote and provide professional learning and training to early childhood educators and any staff to become more aware of what these biases are, so that when we observe racism in our childcare settings, we may be able to handle it appropriately. Many people have biases that they may not even be aware of. In order to recognize these biases, we need to have training and conversations in safe spaces. We need to look within ourselves and accept that we have biases and to be aware how these affect how we care for the children. Once we recognize this, we can work through it to be more culturally sensitive. It is always important to educate yourself and keep up on any training to ensure you are providing the right information to young children. When confronted with uncomfortable situations dealing with sensitive issues, you must always be able to discuss it at the children's development level, but to always be honest and truthful. This will help build a positive awareness of diversity.
Thank you very much. And last but definitely not least, you've given us some wonderful tidbits. Miss Bernice.
Thank you. I think I'll share a personal story to kind of that relates very much so, and was my kind of epiphany with regard to racism. Well, actually, over the COVID, we became grandparents, so we had 3 grandchildren, like within 13 months. One of those children, my youngest son, actually met in Outwijish and married an Ojibwe lady from Northern Ontario, and they later went up to Qalipu to teach. And just last year, they opened family adoption, a custom adoption, adopted a little Inuit baby girl at 1 day old. They went up to Yellowknife. They couldn't go into hospital because, of course, COVID, right? So the grandmother and the dad and the mom came down. It was their 5th child, and they had an open. So they got little Davy Lou when she was a day old, and she's just turned a year old. And, of course, over the past year, I've been going out trying to buy a book or a birthday card, or it's all white faces. So here I'm having to buy birds on it or trees, and thinking, so then I have to order it, order it online or go. And also for me, I'm thinking, now as she's getting older, will people bully her? Will people, give her a hard time because of who she is? And I think for the first time ever, as a grandmother, obviously I love my granddaughter dearly. And we have, of course, 2 grandsons on either side as well. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, just because of the color of her skin, right? And of course, as a white person, that kind of just hit me as having someone that's so close to you, and fearing that they're going to be, bullied or discriminated against just because they look differently than the majority of the people around them. And I think that was awakening. So right now, I'm changing all the curriculum. No, I have a mission now. No, but I think it's so, so very important. This is where it starts. It's a crucial time of life. The early years last forever, so it's so important that we ensure that we have the most inclusive, diverse environment possible, and every child can see themselves. And even if there is no child there, then make sure this is, children who live around the world, live in other parts of Canada, even if there is no, in that small community, right? Making sure that we do our part, in the early learning and childcare field to ensure that all children understand, what diversity is all about and see themselves everywhere. So for me, I feel it at a very different level over the past year, having a little nook baby. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I think I understand it at a level that I never really understood it before.
Yeah, so, and I guess that brings us to the end of our panel. But before we go, I would like to sum it all up because that's what I do, right? So, I'd like to say that every child matters, but not everyone starts at the same place. And we have no other example that I think is so good than the one that Kristen mentioned, the gap of books, the lack of representation, and how that affects your self-esteem, and it affects you while you're trying to build a positive self-esteem for yourself, because not only are you existing within a system, but also within a harmful system. So therefore, as educators, I believe that it's not just our duty, but it should be completely inherent to who we are to make sure that everyone, grandchildren, nieces, they don't feel that way. They will, and I promise you, the first time she comes home and she cries about it, it's going to break your heart. And you're going to want to cry too. But that's going to be how it is, at least for the foreseeable future. But in the words of Sandy Hudson, we will win. Thank you very much for being a wonderful audience, guys. And thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, Gail, Valerie, Bernice, Debbie, Kristen. I appreciate all of the wonderful nuggets of information you all have given me. And I hope to maybe see you all at Cultural Inclusion Camp 2022. We're partnering with Equipon to bring anti-racism and cultural inclusion for free.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to Raven as well. Can we give Raven a round of applause? So we don't have time for Q&A because, we didn't want to interrupt what was going on here, but what we do have is a break coming up and then time to, is this on? Well, whatever, you can hear me. Then we have, oh, there we go. And then we're going right into discussion groups. Inclusion is going to be one of the topics that we have on the discussion group. So I feel like a flight attendant, but if you look at your tag and you look at the bottom, it should say a table number. We have intentionally mixed you up, just alphabetically. It means that people you won't necessarily be sitting with everyone you know. But yeah, over the next 15 minutes or so, make your way to your table. They will be labeled when you get back. Grab a snack, grab a treat. The food's really good. The cinnamon buns are delicious. And yeah, make your way to the table. The instructions are there. One last thing is some of you, so we did have somebody designated for every table, but we've had 15 people have COVID who couldn't come. So there's a big probability that you might not have a person at your table who is the designated kind of timekeeper. So if there isn't someone at your table who's keeping an eye on the time, you can do it. You don't have to report back. There's no reporting back. There's no note taking. Just make sure that you get through the questions. Anyways, at 12 there's lunch and it is provided. It's from Hungry Heart and it is delicious. So we'll go right into that afterwards. See you later.